What's going on, everybody? Good afternoon, and I want to take a little bit of a break from the draft stuff to talk about some of the things that John Schneider has said over the last couple of days here. Again, this is something that was said on Friday, so if you're plugged into this team, you probably already heard this. If you're plugged into Seahawks news, you're probably familiar with the statements, but I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about this because it is something that is very strong in my mind as we move towards April and move towards the NFL draft what's it coming up in less than 4 weeks now. So I want to take a look at this. I briefly touched on this in a previous video, but I'm on. This is from Field Goals, by the way. Mookie's got this over on Field Goals. Seahawks to bring in a couple veteran offensive linemen for visits, says John Schneider. And I'm not going to go over the whole quote, but he basically said that they're going to bring in some offensive linemen in free agency and just trying to figure out if they can bring something to the table that we need and try to make it work. So obviously he's probably referring to the left guard spot specifically. Not necessarily only, but you look at the offensive line right now. You've done well at tackle for the time being. You've done what you can at tackle. Center is okay. It's shaky, but it's okay. Right guard is, I mean, if you're going to make right guard better, you're probably going to do it in the draft because you got a guy like Ankrum to just kind of be a bookmark in the event of you not being able to get somebody better in the draft, right? So he's probably talking about left guard, where we right now don't really have anyone. We technically have somebody like maybe a McClendon Curtis. Some people think Raekwon O'Neal could be a left guard, but they're so far down the order here. And by the way, in this quote, John Schneider brings those guys up, and I appreciate the effort, but it's very hard for me to buy that those guys are going to be NFL caliber players, much less starting caliber players in the NFL. So the issue the Seahawks face right now is they did a really good job during free agency of investing pretty heavily. Well, not necessarily heavily, but investing enough in every position to where they can feel like they're liberated to do whatever they like the most in the draft rather than being obligated to do what they have to do in the draft. And that statement comes with a big exception because they did it at every single position except for left guard, where they basically, essentially, have done nothing. I don't see anybody on this roster that has 53-man caliber left guard play. There was a little bit of buzz about Oluwatimi moving to left guard. I mean, I have nothing to go on there. Some people might say Nick Harris. Nick Harris, to my knowledge, has never played a snap at left guard. Tremaine Ankrum, he can barely handle it at right guard. How's he going to handle left guard? So, I don't know. I don't know. It's weird that we did such a good job of hedging our bets at all these positions. We even got, a young, cheap quarterback. We got the backup right tackle in case Lucas can't go. We bolstered our linebacker core with a couple of starting caliber players. And then you just basically did nothing at left guard. And that puts us in a situation where if we're sitting there with our first round pick, it's 16, or maybe we trade back a little bit, wherever, there's going to be a pull to do what you're supposed to do and take the best player available. And there's also going to be that pull to just take the best left guard prospect. And there's a scenario where that works out great, where maybe it's Fatanu. Maybe it's Graham Barton, who tested brilliantly the other day at his pro day. And by the way, keep an eye on these pro days. We're learning stuff about these prospects with every pro day that goes by. Penix had a great one. Like I said, Barton had a great one. There have been a couple other really good ones. So definitely worth monitoring. But there's a scenario where that ends up working out great, where there's synergy between our board and our pick. But there's also a scenario where it doesn't, where we don't really want those guys that much, but we feel like we have to do it because that's what we need. And that is how you end up with LJ Collier. That is how you end up with a guy like D. Eskridge. You're so obsessed with filling the hole that you end up filling the hole with a guy who ends up not being worth anything, right? Like, yeah, technically we had a need at edge, and we filled it with LJ Collier, but we filled it with somebody who couldn't do anything, who was terrible. We had a need at right tackles. We filled it with Germain Ifedi, but the guy we filled it with wasn't any good. So what's the point? And now here we are in this situation where we might be faced with that dilemma again. John Schneider's already said he doesn't think guards are as valuable as the rest of the league right now, which I may disagree with his evaluation, but if that's his evaluation, then you do need to hedge your bets, and that's what this statement is all about. He's trying to find a way to hedge his bet so he doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do on draft day. He can operate with complete freedom. So, monetarily, financially, you take a look at something like this. I've made a video about this, and if you haven't seen that video, go watch it. I broke down the salary cap stuff as clearly as I could. I did everything I could to clarify the salary cap situation with the Seahawks right now, and you guys know, if you watch that video, I assume we do nothing else for the rest of the offseason in terms of free agency. I assume we make some not so comfortable cuts. I assume that we don't get anybody else, and I still said we're going to be almost $2.5 million over. Now, $2.5 million is easy to mitigate. You can snap your fingers and do a void year, and it's over. But the point I was making is we are already kind of over budget here if we're not looking to do anything like that. And everybody knows we don't like to do stuff like that. Like, we have limited restructuring options left. Like, at this point, you could restructure Geno, restructure DK, and everything else is just kind of, nobody's going to like it. Some people wouldn't like those restructures either, but a lot of people would. You could do some extensions, but most of those would be uncomfortable too. So, the money part is complicated, but I do want to stress this. There's always a way. Without fail, there is a way. You can add void years to anybody's contract. You can restructure a contract. You can extend a contract. You could make some kind of a trade that theoretically doesn't help you that much imminently, but it does buy you a little bit of space. There are so many things you can do that if we did bring in one more free agent and busted out a few more $1 million, there would be a way. Again, it might not be a way that you're in love with personally, but it's a way that is viable. So, if you're wondering where the money's going to come from, my statement to that would just be, the money's going to come from somewhere. The money exists. You just have to go through the process of creating it. As for who it could be, if you go to Spotrac right now and just search by offensive line, you'll see a lot of guys who've been signed, but you go down to the guys who haven't been signed, you're going to see guards. Laken Tomlinson's still out there, Andrews Pete, Cody Whitehair, Mark Lewinsky, that's actually an interesting one. You'll see some centers, and remember, centers can sometimes, depending on the center, not all of them, but some of them can bump over to left guard. There is some ability to transfer over there. You've got tackles, by the way, especially older tackles. Sometimes those guys like to bump over. If a guy like David Bakhtiari wants to stick around in this league, now he's got injury problems, I don't even know if that's a possibility, he might be able to bump over to left guard and be happier there than he would be at tackle right now. Same with a guy like Charles Leno, maybe a guy like Dwayne Brown. I don't know. It depends on the circumstances, but we've seen tackles move to guard all the time in this league, and it sometimes buys these guys a couple years of their career. So I could sit here and list off names, but that would take all day. And the point I'm trying to make here is that there are plenty of options out there. If this is the plan, then the plan is not bad, right? It's not great, but it was never going to be great. We don't have enough money to make it great. But if I'm the Seahawks and I'm trying to find a way to make it so I'm not forced to address left guard heavily in the draft, I want to at least give myself an out to take Dallas Turner if he's there, or Brock Bowers if he's there, or whatever I want to do. If I want to take Byron Murphy there, And I just don't want to be in this situation where those guys are there or one of those guys is there and I'm like, I can't do it because I have to have this. The guys that I would be looking at would be Mark Lewinsky, Phil Haynes, and Dalton Risner. I think those would be my top 3 guys that I'm kicking the tires on. They should all be relatively cheap, couple $1,000,000. Wouldn't really do anything that you're not already into. You'd still be less than 5 million over, which easy to overcome. Not worried about that at all. And in the case of a guy like Risner, he's been a starter in this league for an extended period of time. I don't know what's happened with him. He's obviously not very good, but he is probably barely starting caliber. Glowinski's been a starter in this league for a while. Phil Haynes, he's never been a long-time starter because he just kind of gets hurt too much, but at least he gives you a body. And that's where we are right now. We need bodies, and it's a pretty decent body to have. I think Risner's probably the most appealing because he's the youngest and has been a starter for most of his career in Denver. But if this is the strategy, then given the financial restraints on this team, I guess that it's a workable one. Obviously, there are things that maybe you could have done to make this go down a little bit smoother, but we're clearly not trying to commit long-term money if we can avoid it, so I can understand that that's not happening. But, yeah, what do you guys think? Do you guys think this could actually happen? I kind of feel like if we can make it happen, if we theoretically can make it happen, we need to do it so we're not in a corner in the draft. That's the goal. We are one player away from not being in a tight corner in the draft. So if we can afford it, let's make it happen. See you guys later. Go Hawks. More videos later.